Welcome, everybody, to this episode of the Alumni Podcast. Today, our guest is Andreas Iacovides. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Victoria.
Thank you for coming. So you are a classic musical producer, editor, and a radio presenter who was recently retired.
Yes, correct.
Welcome to retirement.
Thank you.
And also a qualified speech therapist or speech pathologist.
Going back a few years.
Yes, indeed. And finally, class of 1978.
Correct.
Okay. So initially, I'd just like to start by asking the question that the English school has a reputation for being incredibly academic back then and now, from what I understand. And you have followed a path that is very creative. My research into your history because of this podcast, shows what appears to be a very rewarding career in the creative industry. Tell us a bit more about the departure from academics into creativity, or did it all roll in together?
It sort of one complemented the other for a few years, I'd say. I grew up in a musical environment, an amateur musical environment, but still serious amateur musical environment. When I went to the English school, I was fortunate enough in that there was a full-blown symphony orchestra there at the time.
In 1970?
In 1978, yeah.
Wow.
Slightly smaller in scale, but still it had all the instruments. Led at the time by Mr. Panayi and Ara Vorskanyan. I found some ground there to continue in my musical sphere, but at the same time focusing on hardcore academic subjects. We're talking about A-level time back then. I took physics, chemistry, biology.
Wow.
But music was always there.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. So what, before we do sort of dig into your history and your experience, what would you say to anybody now who has a creative heart and wants to follow their creative passion, but is under cultural pressure, family pressure, to follow an academic path first?
I would say that's a very interesting question because you're touching on a personal experience there. I really wanted to go into music, but situation in Cyprus at the time, it wasn't that easy to pursue. So I, as you mentioned in your introduction, I followed collegiate path in speech therapy in the UK, speech pathology. In the US, it's basically the same thing. But I would say don't abandon, to anybody who has that creative side, don't abandon that creative side. It will always come in handy, and you never know when you might fall back on it.
So keep it in your heart.
Oh yeah,
keep it in your heart.
And if it's there in your heart, it really never goes away.
Yeah. And so see it as a side hobby or a hobby initially until you have the wings to fly, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
Because I know you do a lot of other things, and obviously now you're retired, but you've also spoken to me about the choir that you do and the
just retired.
Just retired, yes.
That's about a month. Yes, we've got a concert coming up on February 11th, 2025, that is. I did work as a speech therapist for 7 years at the School for the Deaf in Nicosia.
Right.
Kept my parents happy, I guess.
Yes.
But then after 7 years, I sort of veered off into media, into broadcasting.
And that must have been a really exciting move into that. Did it happen accidentally, or were you in search of the broadcasting?
It happened accidentally, and a number of events, a series of events, sort of pushed me in that direction. As I said, growing up, I grew up in a musical environment. I was working at the School for the Deaf at the time, but also pursued my, as you said, creative interests. I was involved in choirs. I was involved in amateur theatre. And at one time, there was a joint production of ACT, the Anglo-Cypriot Theatre, as it's known, and a choir in which I belonged and later directed, the Nicosia Singers. And we were working on a joint production of a review, music and dance review with Beatles songs.
Oh, wow.
And we got invited up to CYBC for an interview. And the head of the English programs there, Ansula Samuel, asked me if I'd be interested in doing an English language program. So I thought I'd try. Don't have anything to lose. And one thing led to another. And I ended up at CYBC.
Fantastic.
Yeah, 34 years.
Yeah. That's an impressive career.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious, being a radio presenter, is it your opinion, or are you talking to other people? I mean, obviously we listen to the commercial radio presenters and it's all about the music and stuff, but the line that you followed, was you sharing your experience and your opinion about music?
I've always been my own person. Let's put it that way. I've had arguments along the way. I've had discussions along the way with my superiors. But I wouldn't say that I compromised my beliefs or my positions. I mean, I remember when I first started presenting on radio classical music programs, I would talk briefly over the music. And the head of classical music programming at the time called me into her office, El Ligorei, and she said, "Oh, no, we don't talk over classical music." I said, "Well, we do over pop music." And she said, "Yes, well, that's pop music." And I said, "But music is music. And basically what we know today as classical music was the pop music of its time."
Right. Yeah, of course.
And I have always felt that this approach brought classical music closer to your everyday person. Because there was a time in Cyprus when people would just hear the term classical music and switch channels,
right,
saying this isn't for us.
Yeah.
I thought, well, why not bring it to the level of your, excuse my expression, your average Joe, and say, look, it's not that sacrosanct, this type of music. It can be appreciated. It's approachable. If only you look at it or you listen to it in the right way. And I suggested, and I started a half-hour morning program, just excerpts of symphonies or short pieces.
Wow.
And I remember one anecdote there. I got a call from a lady who used to go and clean houses. And she said, I come to this lady's house every Wednesday morning, and she listens to classical music and she plays the piano. I never listen to classical music, but she has the radio on, and I discovered that I like it. And actually, one piece you played, I have as a ringtone on my phone. I didn't know that was classical music. So, well, there you are.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. That's fascinating. I've always wondered about, from being a radio producer, whether you get to choose your own music and choose your own topic of discussion.
We're fortunate enough at CYBC, where I worked, as opposed to private radio stations, in that we're not given a playlist, because that's partly how the music industry works. record companies have arrangements with private radio
Okay.
stations,
Okay.
and they say these are the pieces you're going to play because we want
Mhm.
to promote
Of
these
course. Of
pieces.
course.
CYBC, to
Mhm.
their credit, to the management's credit, does not have playlists for
Mm.
their
Okay.
music producers.
Right.
It's up to each and
Yeah.
every
Yeah.
one of
Yeah.
us.
So therefore, being passionate about that, your type of music, classical music, you would need a passion in it because you'd need to be able to choose the playlist and share those moments with the
Yeah.
audience, which is incredible. And having listened to classical music myself, the thought of it being intercepted with a voice or with some interesting anecdotes
Mm.
does bring a lot more to it. Um, so yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Moving, just extrapolating out from that, how would you try and bring classical music back to the generation that are now leaving school, Gen Alpha, so to
Yeah.
speak?
I have to go back in time there and say that when I was a teenager, when I was at the English school, I'd go to classical music concerts, and you could count the people my age on the fingers of two hands,
Mm.
basically, if that. Nowadays, you go to classical music concerts, and you see many more
Oh,
teenagers there. So the the culture has changed in
okay.
a way. Um, People my age, younger, we go abroad to study. Inadvertently, you're exposed to classical music
Mm,
there.
mm.
You come back to Cyprus, you start looking for it, and things have changed. So basically, music is music. I think I've said that before. Classical music, pop, jazz, uh, as long as it's pleasing to the ear, everybody can find something that they can identify
Mm,
with.
nice. I'm going to take you back now to your childhood. You mentioned briefly earlier about being raised in a musical
Hmm.
family, a creative family, albeit amateur way, and also to your school days. Tell me a little bit more about what it was like growing up in a house that was very musical or very creative.
In one word, fun. My grandfather, my maternal grandfather, was a self-taught guitarist, mandolinist, and a bass mandolin player. Um, he used to play in the Anorthosis. It was a football, sports, and cultural club in Famagusta. And my mother took piano lessons, accordion lessons, guitar lessons, and mandolin. So the instruments were there in the house. I started out on the violin, but once you reach a certain level in your instrument and your knowledge of theory of music, it's just a question of applying that what you've learned
Mm,
to the other instruments available. So it
okay.
was just picked it up along the way.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
that happy childhood, did that moved into your teenage years as well, and your school years were
And
happy?
exactly, the going to the English school fostered that,
Mm,
and um, depending on the needs and the program, Mr. Panayi, the head of music, and I had a sort of unspoken agreement. For one concert, I'd be in the orchestra. For another concert, I'd be in the choir, depending on where he wanted
mm.
to position me.
Very
Yeah.
nice. Very nice. So did your educational environment at the English school influence your career trajectory at all?
Um, I'd be lying if I said it didn't.
Okay.
It was in the 70s, as it is today, strongly geared towards academic achievement, academic excellence. Um, that was the case then, it's the case today. And very probably that's how I ended up in speech
Mm,
therapy.
mm,
Um, Not really, um, what can I say, productive field in music in Cyprus at the time. Um, I remember my mum, not my dad, my mum saying, "Oh, you're going to go and study music and you'll stay abroad and you won't come back to Cyprus. Or if you come back to Cyprus, you'll die a pauper." Uh, so there was a need for speech therapists at the time. We didn't have any. So I decided to go into speech therapy and to do the best with it that I could. And I did. And I worked for 7 years, and then I tendered my resignation and followed the other path.
So you talked earlier about your time in doing military service, compulsory military service. You also found your musical note in military service as well. Tell me a bit about that.
Yes. As I said, I finished the English school, went into compulsory military service. Excuse me. And you're in boot camp. You're hammered, basically, with having to obey orders, not question orders, whatever. So one day in boot camp, this announcement came out over the speakers. Anybody who plays a musical instrument, report to the recreation center. And I went just blindly. And there was this army officer there, a Greek officer, and he asked me if I play an instrument. I said, yes, I play the violin. So he said, there's a violin, pick it up and play. And then he asked me if I play another instrument. And I said, well, yes, I play a bit of the piano, keyboard, there. Anything else? Guitar, pick up the guitar, strum a bit. He said, don't you play a wind instrument? I said, well, yes, I play the clarinet. He said, why didn't you say anything? No, you didn't ask me. Yeah. So I picked up the clarinet and played, and I ended up in the army band for 2 years. And it was a great learning experience musically, because in our non-military side of duties, we would focus entirely on music.
Nice.
But then after that, I still went and studied speech therapy.
So you still held on to the speech therapy idea?
Yeah, family pressure and all that. But even then, at university in Wales, the first year, I was in the university hospital orchestra and the university choir. And then when I went to the States, things got a bit more serious because I got involved with the university opera.
Right. And, okay, quite serious then. Yeah. Wow. So why the US? Was it an opportunity? Was it?
It was my period of studies coincided with a time when Margaret Thatcher hiked the fees for overseas students. And it was financially much easier for a Cypriot student at the time to study in the States. It was more economical.
Would have never put that connection together.
Yeah.
So Cyprus and the US. Amazing. So tell me a bit more about university days in the US then. That must have been quite the culture shock, or was it, coming from Wales?
It was. And I have to say this, at the risk of being censored. I first went to Minnesota. I studied in Minnesota, which is known for its strong winters.
Yes. Ice hockey team, right? The really big ice hockey team. Have I got that right?
No, the football. They had the Minnesota Vikings football. Not much as far as ice hockey goes, but the first snow in Minnesota falls around the end of October, and then the snow melts end of March. So you're talking about, and average winter temperatures -10, -15 Celsius.
Okay.
So, and here's this young Cypriot man who spent a year in Wales windy and rainy.
I was going to say.
Going to the States to start studying in December. And as every new student does, one goes to the university bookstore to get supplies, stationery and whatever. And I go to the university bookstore and I see this huge banner saying fanny warmers for sale. And I thought, where have I come to?
Landed.
They're selling fanny warmers? Well, that was the 80s. And I'm sure you remember, in the States, in the Midwest, a fanny is your derriere.
Yeah, yeah.
And it was those knit sweaters with the elasticated bottom, which sort of hugged your derriere.
Right.
I didn't know that was a fanny. I thought the fanny was something else.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
yeah, that was a culture shock. And of course, you had the differences in vocabulary as well. You don't stand in a queue. No, you stand in a line. You don't take the lift up to the 10th floor. You take the elevator and lots of other things. Yeah.
How were your peers around you at university? Did they accept you? Was it quite international university?
It was an international university. I was involved in the International Student Association. But also, Americans have this thing about British accents, and they're fascinated by it. And they've got this thing about royalty as well, but that's another story. So my quasi-British accent at the time was a big hit there.
With the girls too, I imagine.
Okay, yeah.
You got to use every advantage you have, right?
Well, I didn't use it. Was exploited. Let's put it that way.
Excellent.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
So 3 years there?
5 actually.
Wow.
Because I did the masters as well.
Yeah. Wow. And in speech therapy.
In speech therapy.
And then you come back to Cyprus, and your mother's freaking out because she thinks you're going to be a pauper, or
well, no, I was.
Must have been happy to see you.
Yeah. There was a job open, the first civil service position as a speech therapist at the School for the Deaf, and I applied. I came for the interview, and I got it. And my then wife, she's American. She's now my ex-wife. We decided to come back to Cyprus, and and I worked at the School for the Deaf for 7 years until the CYBC interview, which I mentioned earlier. And then I worked in parallel at the School for the Deaf and weekends at CYBC for 2 years until I made the final break, the switch, and went into media.
Do you think that your love of music, obviously you have an ear for music. I'm tone deaf, so I'm exploiting your experience here. Your love of notes and music, did that support your journey in speech therapy? Because it's very tonal, isn't it? From what I understand, speech therapy.
Yeah.
And you can, being qualified in that, you could pick up which was missing and what was there. Tell me a little bit more about that.
I think having a musical ear is important, but not necessary.
Okay.
For a speech therapist. I dare say one would be a better speech therapist if one has that musical ear. Right. But it's a paramedical field. There's a number of techniques and strategies which can help you go about alleviating speech and language problems in an individual. A musical ear is not necessary, but it definitely helps.
It does help,
yeah,
does it?
A lot.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
What would the rewards be for a career in speech therapy? Personal rewards.
That's a very interesting question. It is rewarding because you work not only with children, which, for a number of reasons, are slow in developing language, have speech problems, but you also get the opportunity to work with adults,
Okay.
adults who've had what in the professional jargon is known as closed head injuries, um, strokes,
Okay.
um, accidents, blows to the head, and it's sometimes frustrating. It's not easy. Uh, you can struggle and struggle and see your efforts frustrated again and again. But when that breakthrough comes, you say, yes,
Yeah, right.
we did it. Not you did it.
Okay.
The speech therapist and the patient,
And the patient.
they did it together. And to see that, the look of sheer satisfaction on the face of the patient, with a child, they'll break out into laughter, they'll jump up and down. Whatever. With an adult, it's I dare say it's more rewarding,
Right.
because that adult who's had the closed head injury has managed to retrieve something they knew they had and they lost.
Wow.
And that's when you get that breakthrough, it really is rewarding.
And it's such a fundamental part of communicating as a human beings, isn't it? Speech. I mean, we learn to communicate using body language and other things, but the primary is your voice. And once you recover that,
Yeah.
that must be an incredible.
And your language.
Yeah.
Because we need to distinguish between speech and language.
Okay. What is the difference?
Well, speech is the voice you produce, the sounds you make, whatever. Language it has a much more profound effect. Language is not just verbal. You mentioned body language as well. You've got written language, you've got verbal language, body language, and it's governed by certain rules, which some of them apply universally.
Right.
So that's why in the UK, it started out the profession being known as speech therapy. Right. The Americans adopted that different approach. They called it speech and language pathology.
Okay.
And now in the UK, it's speech and language therapist.
Right. Okay. Yeah, and I suppose with your patient, like any therapy, it's a time process. You've got to put the work in to get the results. It's not an immediate fix. It's not
no.
Fascinating. Fascinating. Yeah. Right. Let's jump back into your classical music and media. Favorite stage musical soundtrack?
How far back?
Whichever one moves you, whichever one makes you want to get up and.
West Side Story.
Right. Okay.
If we go back a few years.
Okay.
More recently, Les Misérables.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hands down. No argument about that.
And the West Side Story, the soundtrack, as well as the performance.
Yeah.
Did you ever get to see it live?
No, I never saw it live. I actually have 3 recordings of West Side Story at home.
Okay.
The original one, where Natalie Wood is dubbed.
Right.
By what's her name? Forget the name of the singer actually, who dubbed Natalie Wood in West Side Story, Deborah Carr in The King and I, and Audrey Hepburn in My Fair Lady.
Right.
Mitzi, I think, was
Mm-mm.
the first name. Um, there, that's the soundtrack from the film,
Mm-mm.
and you get the raw feeling uh, of the gangs, the Sharks and the Jets.
Right.
Um, then Bernstein, for reasons that only he could tell us if he were alive, did a studio recording of West Side Story with Kirita Kanawa
Mm-hmm.
and Jose Carreras in the lead roles.
Right.
I went out and bought that recording as well. Musically, it's perfect, but it lacks grit.
Oh, okay. Okay.
It's too polished
Right.
for the
Mm.
the storyline, if you like.
Mm-mm.
Then Barbara Bonney and Michael Ball made a recording of West Side Story, and that to me is the best
Okay.
because we're talking. Barbara Bonney is a classical music soprano. Michael Ball, as your viewers probably know, musical theatre, and there's a link to Les Misérables here because he played Marius in
Okay.
some performances. And that recording of West Side Story to me is the best. It combines the musical techniques
Mm-mm.
with the grittiness of the storyline.
Yeah, yeah.
Of course, the lyrics by Sondheim, who later went on to write many musicals of his own. There's something else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will look forward to try and explore that. Now I
Mm.
have a bit more depth from your experience. And Les Miserables, tell me a bit more about that.
Well, of course, it's based on the Victor Hugo novel, same name. I have to say I was disappointed at the film version of it.
Okay.
Why they picked Russell Crowe to play the role of Javert, I don't know. Stage musical. I've been to see it 5 times live. It's it never grows old on me. I'm fascinated by it. It's a brilliant story of Jean Valjean. It's a touching story. It's an epic. It captures the ambiance, the climate in France post 1789 revolution. Of course, student uprisings, and well, as I'm sure anybody who's seen it will agree, it's a brilliant musical.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I haven't seen it myself, but
Yeah.
another one I should put on my bucket list.
Mhm.
There are a few musicals coming to Cyprus, I noticed. Chicago and Fame are coming
Well,
this year.
stage production.
Stage pro, yeah,
Yeah.
which is a different
Concert
different. Yeah,
productions.
okay,
Yeah.
that's I wouldn't know the definition of the difference, obviously.
And
'cause of your
I
work,
don't know
but-
if they're going to have live orchestra as
okay,
well, or if it's just going to be
yeah.
soundtrack.
So we might be missing the grit then.
Mhm. But having said that, there's a young guy in Limassol,
Mm.
Aris Antoniadis, and I would say keep your eyes and ears open for him because he's a brilliant musician,
Okay.
and he collaborates with uh, musicians from the West End, musical theatre singers, and every once in a while he puts on shows. And he does a great job.
Yeah.
Sort of not complete musicals, but excerpts from musicals.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. While we're talking about that stage productions, you and I talked briefly about the Cyprus Symphony Orchestra, and you were talking about recommending the youth events. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, the Cyprus Symphony Orchestra started out as the Cyprus State Orchestra. I think it was about 1980. And it has gradually grown to what it is today, the Cyprus Symphony Orchestra. Um, and during the early days, it was bolstered by um, young graduate musicians from abroad. Dushko Zarkovic on the clarinet was one of the first members. Kelly Alijani, who's still with the orchestra on the horn, Welsh
Okay.
lady, well, no, English actually. Gareth on the trumpet. I was fortunate enough to meet them when they first joined the Cyprus Symphony Orchestra, because at that time we had what was called a Music and Fine Arts Fund, and they approached me. I was working at the School for the Deaf at the time. They approached me if I wanted to be a member of the committee. And I said yes, and I actually acted as liaison and translator for the three I mentioned earlier.
Amazing.
And the Cyprus State Orchestra. But it's grown since Cyprus, when I was growing up, didn't have a culture in wind instruments.
Okay.
Yeah. It was mostly piano, violin, fiddle, if you like, guitar, stringed instruments. And it's with the establishment of the Cyprus State Orchestra and these wind instrumentalists who were imported in a way that now we've achieved a culture in winds as well. We have young Cypriot musicians playing both in Cyprus and in orchestras abroad.
Oh, amazing.
Clarinet, Orpheas Hirados, is in Switzerland. French horn, Lambis Pavlou is in Finland.
Wow.
But there's plenty in the Cyprus Symphony Orchestra and the Youth Symphony Orchestra as well. And whereas I may miss a concert by the Cyprus Symphony Orchestra, I try not to miss a concert by the Cyprus Youth Symphony Orchestra, which is considered one of the best in Europe, youth symphonies.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I would urge our viewers to start following the CYYSO, as it's known.
Okay.
You'll find it on the CYSO webpage, and the young ones deserve all the support they can get.
Fantastic. I will also put the link in the show notes as well to the ticket page. I've come across it quite a few times, but follow through definitely. Fantastic. Okay, so flicking back to the radio and media, how do you feel like music has changed and media has changed in this new digital age? You must have seen a lot of changes.
Yes, you struck the key word there, this digital age. I was at with some friends the other day, actually. Went to a jazz evening. Yes, I do listen to jazz as well. It's not just classical music. Nice. And somebody who I was meeting for the first time said, well, how do you feel about AI and music, which is coming up now?
Yeah.
And I said, well, it's going to be difficult to tell if a piece of music was written by AI or by a human. He said, no, I don't mean that. He said, I mean in drawing up playlists and whatever.
Right.
Yes, you can program AI to draw up a playlist. And I'll come back to West Side Story.
Okay.
And the Bernstein recording I mentioned earlier with Kirite Kanawa and Jose Carreras in the two lead roles.
Okay.
Yes, technically perfect, but it lacks that ineffable human touch. And I believe that an AI-generated playlist, um, of course, you can have a presenter, again, AI if you like, but it will lack that human touch. It will, there's no feeling of a real life person going into it and putting his or her own experiences through that music. Yeah.
So using it, I guess, in many industries, not just the music and the
Yeah.
radio and the media industry, using it to support your role, but not to surpass it.
It would be a great aid, I feel, yes. But I don't think. Remember when CDs first came out?
Yeah.
And people were saying, oh, technically flawless, whatever, and the fidelity is such that it's going to replace orchestras. And well, it hasn't.
No.
They haven't replaced orchestras. We still have live music concerts. And moving into a bit of technical stuff again, and physics and acoustics. We had, and we still do, and we're witnessing a comeback to analog technology, to vinyl records.
Okay. Yeah.
And there's a growing interest in them because with vinyl, you have a sine wave, a curve going up and down the frequency of the music. With digital, what you have is not a smooth curve, but it's a series of steps.
Right. Okay.
Granted, those steps are tiny, smaller and smaller, so they simulate a smooth curve. But I had a personal experience in that which convinced me about the beauty of analog recordings.
Right.
I've got a friend who's a hi-fi buff. And he's got high-grade sound reproduction systems, preamps, amps, whatever. And I was at his place one day, and another English school graduate, a year younger than me, George Christopoulos. And he said, sit there. He had his own special armchair where he would sit and listen to music.
I'm sure.
Perfectly positioned. I sat down. He said, close your eyes. And he put a recording on, Beethoven's Ninth. He said, recognize it? I said, yes, of course, Beethoven's Ninth. And I would dare say it's the Berlin Philharmonic with Karajan conducting. And he said, yes. Now close your eyes. And he played Beethoven's Ninth again, the same excerpt. And I said, okay, it's the same, but you've done something, you twiddled some knobs. You don't. Because my ear felt a warmer sound. He said, no. The first one was digital, CD. The second one, vinyl.
Really?
Yeah. It's a different...
Yeah.
We can't put our finger on it, but our ear can tell the difference. Yeah.
Wow,
So
that's fascinating.
CDs came in, yes, more durable. They when they first came out, they're indestructible. Well, no.
Apparently so, right?
They don't. More durable than vinyl, but you can't replicate the feeling of an analog recording.
Yeah. Incredible. This would be, I was listening to the radio the other day and they were talking about Desert Island Disc and I was like, oh, I'd love to do that. So if I asked you about three, obviously you're going to need a record player, which is going to be really difficult if you get stranded on an island.
With no electricity.
With no electricity.
They're going to have a dynamo.
There you go. Let's go with one of those then. So give me three records that you would take with you.
The entire soundtrack of the stage production of Les Mis.
Right.
Hands down.
Right.
Beethoven, not his ninth, but his sixth, his pastoral.
Okay.
Um, and Mahler's Fifth Symphony.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any of those, other than the first one, any of those are popular classical albums that?
Mahler's Fifth Symphony, some people may recognize from the slow movement, the Adagietto. If you've seen the film Death in Venice,
right,
by directed by Visconti, the Adagietto, the slow movement from Mahler's Fifth, figures prominently in that.
Okay.
A piece of music that Greek composer Manos Hatzidakis actually borrowed from in his album Pornographia, and he uses it in the Ode to Marilyn Monroe.
Oh,
in that album.
Yeah,
he borrows from Mahler's Fifth from the Adagietto. Yeah.
Wow, fascinating. That's incredible. Okay, let's come back into the present day now. I've got this vision of you on an island and you're winding up your thing, training the monkeys to wind up the sun. What was it called? The old-fashioned ones?
The gramophone.
Gramophones, gramophones. Thank you. Okay, so if you could go back in time and give your younger self advice, what would that be? What would that look like?
I would say forget about speech therapy and follow your dream. Things have changed. Communication, travel is much easier these days. So I would say to all the young ones out there, pursue your dream. And I'm glad to notice that more and more young people nowadays are doing exactly precisely that. Parents, okay, we're talking mid-70s. It was a difficult time for Cyprus. The war, the coup, the invasion took place in 1974. Future was uncertain. Some would argue that future is still uncertain. Insecurities at the time, both societal and personal insecurities. But never give up on your dream, and follow it.
Yeah.
Because if it's something you love, then you give it your all.
Yeah, I guess there's a lot of cultural pressures. There's a lot of family pressures
Always
to follow
is.
certain career paths. So it must be very challenging for a young person to actually say, actually, this is what I want to do. But you know, with Gen Alpha, who knows, right? They seem to be very outspoken and forthright.
Yeah, but even if you follow the more conventional path, there's always your love to fall back on. As a matter of fact, I remember a few years ago, an English school graduate, Konstantinos Andronikou, his family had an accounting firm. And they wanted Konstantinos to go into accounting and follow the family business. And Konstantinos was and is very musical.
Okay.
He had a brilliant tenor voice. And his parents were dead against him while he was at school, going into music. Then Konstantinos ended up in the army band, as one does. And I remember one Christmas, they were playing downtown Nicosia, the army band. And I was downtown doing my shopping, and I saw Konstantinos and some other guys from the English school, his age there, performing. So I stopped and listened. And as I was there, I feel a tap on my shoulder. I turn around and it's Konstantinos' dad. And he said, Mr. Iacovides, 'cause I used to go and help at the English school at the time with musicals and choir. That opens up another chapter.
Yeah, I was going to say,
Yeah.
there's a whole world of exploration there. We need to do part 2 of this for sure.
And I feel this tap on my shoulder and I turn and it's Konstantinos' dad. And he said, Kiri Andronigo, how are you? Whatever. And he said, you'll be glad to know that Konstantinos is going to follow music. And Konstantinos now lives in London. He's very active in the West End scene, and I'm very happy for him.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Absolutely amazing. Yeah. What a lovely story. Yeah, that's fantastic. Great. Now we're reflecting back a little bit. Were you happy in your career? Is happiness something that you go, I was very happy?
In my broadcasting career.
Oh, your career in general from after you left school?
Yes, okay. Extremely happy. The 7 years at the School for the Deaf were rewarding, but it was something I learned over the course of my studies, and I implemented it and put it to work. 34 years at CYBC was something else. They were me.
Okay.
From beginning to end.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And that made you happy?
Yes.
Yeah. And you have children?
I have one son who lives in the States, in Minneapolis. He'll be 36 this year.
Following a music path or not at all?
He plays the guitar. Again, as an amateur, he loves music, but no, he's very much his own person there. Yeah.
So recent retirement as well. What does that look like? You have another lifetime now. You have another chapter in your life. Do you have a plan, or are you just following your heart?
I take each day as it comes. Interesting from former colleagues at CYBC. They say, "Oh, we know you won't get bored with retirement because you've got so many interests, and you're active." And even when I was at CYBC, I would still be involved with extracurricular activities, so to speak, choirs, mostly choirs, because after my stint at the University Opera in Minnesota, I sort of turned my back on instrumental music, and I said, no, the voice is the most perfect musical instrument there is. Yeah. So, true enough, I'm not bored, and I don't think I will, because there's so many interests. There's a wide scope of things to do, and
just follow that path to see where it goes.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure, and there are several other avenues that I wish we could have gone down to talk about.
Well, the time's gone already.
Yes, it is, unfortunately. So let's look forward to part 2.
Okay, and as I would say, Victoria, I've said it, you touched upon it. I would say to the English school students, follow your dream, because you never know where it'll bring you, but you will find happiness and satisfaction.
Amazing. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you.